Very good afternoon, everyone. Warm welcome to the last episode of the Slice the Pie webinar series. Myself, Pavni, I'll be hosting this webinar today. As this is the last webinar, let me take this moment to profusely thank each and every one of you for your unswerving support throughout. In total, we hosted overall eight episodes, including this one, and the response for each and everyone has been extremely overwhelming, and the sessions were quite interactive with extremely meaningful discussions and provoked by the questions that you asked, all of you. I thoroughly enjoyed hosting these sessions personally, and so is the team of our presenters. Here I have a humble request. So if you liked our content and find it meaningful, please do subscribe to our channel on our YouTube. We have been uploading all the previous webinars, and also it has more automation concept videos. So it would be great if you could subscribe to us and also share to your connections. So coming to today's session, it's about designing a smart warehouse. So we all know the importance of warehouse design and the role a smart warehouse plays in bringing efficiencies in picking, packing, material movement, productivity, safety, etc. So a holistic approach right at the beginning will go a long way in deriving maximum benefit from a warehouse. So, but how do you ensure which is the best design or layout for your warehouse? And also when the multitudes of automation technologies are available in the market, how do you ensure which is the best automation for you? So joining this webinar will provide you a walkthrough on the same. And coming to the presenter, you are already familiar with Sriram from the first episode of the same series, that Micro Fulfillment Center. So Sriram has joined us as VP for International Sales. He comes with an experience of over 10 years in warehouse automation and robotics after having led international businesses at L&T and Grey Orange. So with a vision to build a robust digital footprint for organizations using robotics and AI-based solutions, Sriram thoroughly believes in human and robots collaboration to raise the bar of productivity and efficiency. So with this, I would like Sriram to take it over from here. Meanwhile, I'll also share the link to our channel. So kindly do subscribe. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Pavni. Thanks for those kind words and introduction. Good evening, good afternoon, from wherever you're joining in. It's a pleasure and delight to be once again, presenting you the eighth and the final episode of Slice the Pie, a series of episodes where we've been trying to educate and make people aware about what the power of automation is in this new normal that we're all entering into. And in light of that, and in light of all the various engagements and questions that came through last 7 episodes, we thought we'll do something a bit different today. We wanted to walk you through what a smart warehouse looks like, what are the building blocks for it, and what are the fundamentals that one needs to look at when someone's designing a smart warehouse. So what are we going to cover today on the session, right? So I'm going to talk about 4 key aspects. Firstly, we'll speak about supply chain trends. And I think we have touched upon this on various topics over the last 7 weeks. We spoke about the trend of micro-fulfillment. We spoke about what COVID is going to do to your distribution centers. We spoke about what the other industries like healthcare, airports are actually bracing themselves to. But today we'll focus a lot on how these macro trends are impacting your distribution center design, right? So this is more than a macro impact, a micro impact on what these trends are going to sort of shape in the way you think about designing a warehouse. The second part, we'll probably focus more on the fundamentals that you need to get right before you actually start thinking about a smart warehouse. And I'm going to cover 7 key principles that one needs to look at when you go about actually stepping your development in a smart warehouse facility. The third is the various building blocks that has been identified from a smart warehouse perspective by various thought leaders and best practice companies, which I'm going to put together for you. And the last but not the least, to give you a sneak peek of what the smart warehouse encompasses, what are the different technologies one needs to look at, and what are the pillars that one needs to focus to build a fully automated and smart warehouse. And you'll see at the end of this, and I hope after the 45 minutes that we spend together, you'll take home some very important aspects about how to build a smart warehouse. And the interesting nuance is you don't have to really depend on 100% robotics and automation every day to build a smart warehouse, because smart warehouse is about building an efficient distribution center or efficient process inside your warehouse, so that you end up spending as less money as possible to run your operations. To start with, I wanted to throw some statistics to you. This came from a 2019 MHI industrial report that was done by Deloitte. Basically, Deloitte went to a lot of very, very well-known multinational companies who are deemed to have one of the best supply chain practices globally. And they spoke to supply chain directors and CXOs who look after that vertical in the company. And some interesting questions were raised, and a very interesting aspect came out of that discussion, right? And all of these conversations were very specific to what they are doing in their warehouses today, and where they see their warehouses moving towards in the next few years. So the first thing that came out very clearly was 80% of those best practice companies are actually looking at IIoT, or they're already using IoT solutions inside the warehouse. So this could be, very smart devices, which you can put on a forklift, which you can put on a hand scanner and an RF scanner, which actually talks to your cloud or the internet beyond the four walls of the warehouse, where you can log data. So that brings in a lot of accessibility in terms of the information that is there. The second key thing, 70% of them said that they're already utilizing wearable and mobile technologies, right? So these could be ring scanners, these could be scanners that are used by operators, these could be an iPad used by the forklift and the material handling mover. It could also be a voice solution used by a picker and packer, right? So there are already wearable and mobile technologies that are available, which people are already using, which makes your hands free, therefore increasing the productivity. Another startling thing came out of that survey is education and wisdom gap, right? And to sort of define this, what the supply chain leaders are telling us is it's very hard to find the right skilled workers inside the warehouses today. If you're running a warehouse for the last 30-40 years, you'll find a lot of people who worked in that warehouse for 20-25 years non-stop. So they build a lot of experience in terms of understanding each and every process. But as you move into the 2020s, where we are in, you'll see that the majority of the workforce would be around 20 to 30-year-olds. But what's actually happening is these 20 to 30-year-olds don't want to be working inside the warehouse, right? And that's at least the trends that we're seeing in the Northern Hemisphere of the world, where people actually are rather happy to work for an Uber, for a Grab, or for a gig economy, essentially, because that's quick bucks with not probably a lot of effort in spending 10-12 hours walking around aisles and doing those laborious activities. So they are seeing a huge skill gap in employing this labor and actually training them, and therefore not getting the efficiencies that they're looking at. Another key thing came out is about AI. I think if I don't talk about AI, I won't do justice to the discussion on smart warehouse. Essentially, I'm not saying people are already doing AI. I think we still have a far way to go, but there are at least the thought processes in. So all of these supply chain leaders have implemented some form of smart warehouses already using all of these technologies that I spoke about previously. And they're now thinking about how they can bring in robotics, how can they bring in machine learning, how can they bring in software to move towards an artificial intelligent powered distribution center. A good chunk of them are also now betting high in investing into supply chain, investing into warehouses. And that's a great sign, because all along warehouse has been seen as a cost driver or a cost function. But today, I think people are starting to look at it as a value add. So it's really about, if you've got a good supply chain, and more so if you've got a good network of warehouses and you've got really good warehouses, you might actually get the competitive edge in terms of delivering the goods a lot more faster, in terms of delivering them in a manner that the customer likes, and also obviously accurately, so that you don't end up spending a lot of money. So these were some of the key things that drove me to say that there are smart warehouses available already. A lot of these best practice companies are doing it. Key question to ask yourself is, are you doing it, right? And that's something I'm going to discover over the next 30 to 40 minutes or so. Now, I did mention that I'm going to speak more about how these trends are impacting distribution center design. There are a couple of things happening. Some things are going up, some things are going down. But at the end of the day, both of them, these dual changes are actually making the life of a distribution center operator a lot more difficult than what it is today. So first point is on inventory, right? On one hand, inventory is rising. And the reason for that is essentially people want to build more stock just so that they can manage instances like that's happening to us today. So they want to maintain a much better safety stock so that they have the ability to serve their customers in case supply chain disruptions like COVID does happen. So on one hand, you have inventory increasing. On the other hand, the warehouse spaces are actually decreasing. So it's getting harder to find good warehouses. And I'm going to cover that also in a bit. But essentially, even if you find a good warehouse, the space that is available is getting shorter and shorter, right? Because a lot of development is happening. People want to move towards cities. And therefore, finding a good amount of space also is an art. And I'm sure if you are in the space of supply chain, especially in the warehouse business, you do know that you need to start 4 to 6 months before you actually move a warehouse or actually start looking for a warehouse. So that's becoming a very critical point. So on one hand, inventory is increasing and warehouse space is decreasing, which means how do you store and where do you store? The second point is lead time to acquire. So if you are running a warehouse business or if you're running any business for that matter, you must have raw materials to produce. So just like you, your suppliers are also facing the same problem. They're not able to meet customer demands, and therefore their lead times are increasing. But unfortunately, the customer's lead times is decreasing, right? People are talking about same day delivery, next day delivery. I had a chocolate delivered in 2 days, and I couldn't believe it, right? Because that's where the world is moving towards, wherein even the essential and non-essential will become very critical for everyone. And you've got to find a way to be in that bandwagon at the end of the day. The third point is labor cost, right? And I think this is a very important aspect across developing economies as well as developed economies. Obviously, developed economies, the costs are rising quite exponentially over the last few years, but we are seeing the same trend in other countries like India, Vietnam, Thailand. Wherever I speak to our customers, the data that we're getting is that the labor cost, even these developing economies, are increasing, and this goes back to the availability of labor, right? And I spoke about how the workforce today may not be interested to work in warehouses and factories, so the availability is decreasing, and therefore the cost is rising, which again makes it very difficult for you to design the right set of operational aspects. And the fourth is warehouse rentals, right? I think over the last 7 weeks or so, we spoke about how important it is to build your distribution center near the cities or the urban areas so that the last mile delivery costs go low. But when you do that, the rentals go high, right? And that's even in a case if you're looking at a residential building, more you move towards the downtown area, the cost would increase. And the difficult part is there aren't many warehouse locations that are good enough to suit your operation. So at one hand, the rentals are increasing, and the other hand, the good warehouse locations are going faster than that what they're available. So at the end of the day, for a warehouse manager, there are a lot more variables to solve, but he just not have enough equations to solve them, right? And that's essentially the problem statements that is there in front of all of us today. Now, I did mention I'm going to share with you what I believe are 7 key fundamentals of warehouse design. And I've chosen these 7 because there are probably a bunch more. But in my opinion, these are the most important things that one needs to look at when you're starting a new warehouse across business, right? It doesn't have to be e-commerce, doesn't have to be retail. The basic principles remain the same. So first thing is minimal touches of inventory. So what this really means is once you receive the inventory into the warehouse, you try to make sure that you don't touch it using labor or any other equipment for that matter too often, right? If you touch it too often, it may lead to safety issues, it may lead to productivity issues, and therefore making your operations less efficient. So in my experience, if you're running a fairly semi-automated or even mildly automated setup, if you're achieving around 3 to 4 or 3 to 5 touches per inventory or per SKU, you're doing quite well. If you're probably at 6 to 8, then I think there's a lot of scope for improvement. And today, with a smart warehouse, you're looking at a target of 0 to 1. And 0 is actually a real number. And I'm going to show you a video at the end of this to show how you don't even have a single labor touching your piece of inventory as it comes into the warehouse and as it goes out. The second key thing, and there's a reason why I've put that in gray, because I'm going to deep dive in all of those topics more. But essentially, to get the inventory in the right location in your warehouse is also super key in how efficient your operations can be, right? Now, what in the warehouse management science world, you would call it slotting. So to make sure that depending on the velocity, depending on the size, depending on the nature of the SKU, you have a particular area that needs that the SKU deserves to be, and that's something you need to look at more closely if you're running a fulfillment center or a distribution center with tens and thousands of SKUs. And I'm going to go deep into that shortly. The third thing is flow, right? And I like to believe a one-way flow, right from receiving to put away to storage to dispatch to sort to dispatch. If it's a single flow, you would end up, having a lot more efficient operation. It's almost like an assembly line, and we covered that in one of our weeklies that was done on the webinar, where we said if you can design your warehouse like an assembly line, where value-added services keep happening right from the start to the end, you would end up being a lot more efficient in your operations, both in terms of process and in terms of labor. And I'm going to share a few cases or case studies of different types of flows one can look at inside the warehouse shortly. The fourth important thing is know your current KPI, right? It's very important to baseline your existing performance. And this is somewhere connected to point number 6, which is invest time and money on data, right? At the end of the day, if you don't know where you stand, you can never improve. So it's all about making sure you have the base systems available in your warehouse. Essentially, there are many softwares available, right from Express Warehouse Management System to very, very traditional and sophisticated management systems, which can essentially help you in collecting a lot of data from a process standpoint, from a labor standpoint, from an equipment standpoint, and that will help you understand where your current KPI lies, and then you can benchmark it against one of the best in your industry and have a roadmap towards achieving it. Point number 5 is very close to my heart, and I've been on the good and the bad side of this. Never design your warehouse, be it the storage, be it the throughput, be it the equipment, be it the labor, on averages, right? And any supply chain or any warehouse design enthusiast that you speak to, they would always get very statistical in terms of understanding, okay, what is the probability of these averages happening over a period of a season? What is the mean? What is the median? What is the mode? There are a lot of statistical terms that one needs to look at to design the right warehouses. I have a very famous saying from my customer that if we design a warehouse on averages, you may get it right only half the time, and you will get it wrong half the time. And when you get it wrong half the time, you end up spending a lot more money than what you had estimated to. So to design a warehouse on averages is something you need to look at long and closely. And there are several other ways to look at it as well. The last but not the least is selecting the right amount of automation, right? And I think this is very close to our heart, because we saw over the last 7 weeks a lot of people asking, hey, does this automation technology fit for us? And I'm going to take a stab at breaking it down for you in helping you select the right type of automation. There are 3 key things here. One is whether you need automation. The second is what is the right type of automation. And the third is the amount of automation. So I'm going to break it down so that you can have a better flavor of what you need to do if you're looking to automate in your facility. Now, I did say I'm going to spend a deep dive on a couple of concepts, right? So the first concept I'm going to discuss is slotting, right? Now, like I mentioned, the definition of slotting is once you receive the inventory, you have to put it away into storage locations, right? Now, if you randomly store them, there are multiple problems that could happen. Assuming, in most cases, probably in e-commerce fashion, it could not happen because the fluctuations are almost same. But in most businesses, you will have a certain set of products which move or which are a lot more popular than a certain other set of products. So, for example, in grocery, you would end up, selling rice, sugar, salt a lot more often than a very luxury chocolate, which doesn't run so often in the warehouse. So it's very important for you to slot them in correct locations, and so that the picking time is as less as possible. So there are three variables that slotting impacts. One is the travel time. So travel time is the time taken by the operator to walk all the way to that location, pick the item of inventory, put it into a basket or a tote, and then bring it back to the dispatch area. Now, statistically speaking, 60% of an operator's time inside the warehouse is spent in walking, right? So if you don't slot properly, you end up adding to this effort and therefore making your operations a lot less efficient. That has a direct impact on labor, which is again seen as around 30 to 40% of your cost of operation. So if you can target that piece, that's another aspect that you can look at in terms of reducing the cost of operation. The third is a very interesting aspect, which is SLA on SKU sales. And this is very relevant to the e-commerce audience. Now, generally in e-commerce business, you put a product on sale, you run a campaign for a couple of weeks, and you almost build the momentum, right, with the customer, and the slurry of orders come in right after. So let's say you run a campaign in a week and a half, you need to start dispatching it out of the warehouse, and you receive the consignments at the end of the week. Instead of actually having that pallet put away into a storage location, you would rather put it away into a packing area and start picking the items and packing it, right? So slotting just doesn't mean putting in the right location in your storage media. It could also mean where do you actually put it once the inventory arrives. So when you look at these three things, slotting as a concept itself can help you in optimizing your operations considerably. The second concept is connected to slotting, right? And I spoke about flow. Here I'm going to talk about three very interesting flows for three different industries. I want you to notice that I've put some blue color narrow looking rectangles there. What that really represents is a rack, right? Or a storage location. And you would see that it goes from dark blue on the north to the lightest blue in the south. So what that really indicates is is the slotting phenomenon, right? And a warehouse which has this slotting phenomenon is generally called a triadic warehouse, because you basically split the SKUs into three zones, and the zone which is the darkest is generally near the inbound and outbound stations, so that the time to put away and time to pick is as little as possible. And the slow moving SKUs are pushed right to the bottom because they are not as popular, and hence you don't have to spend too much time going to that location. So the first flow is essentially a U-shaped flow. And this is considered as one of the standard flows in any distribution center that you go into. So you have items of inventory coming in the right, you would do value-added services, you would put it away, and then you would pick it and send it out through the left-hand side. So a typical retail operation, you would see a U-shaped flow being universally considered as a good flow to have. The second is in the courier and express business. Now, these are high throughput businesses wherein the inventory comes in, it doesn't spend a lot of time inside the warehouse. They get sorted into different destinations, and then off she goes away very quickly. So when you have a very low dock to dock time, so the time it enters the warehouse and the time it leaves the warehouse is probably not more than a day maximum, you would probably have this flow through kind of setup. So it can either have it on the left or on the right. And in many cases, you will not even have a storage media in these kind of setups, because essentially things come in. There is a bunch of technologies you can use to sort the items into different lanes, You could also have the docks on the top or the north, or the north and the south of this warehouse, if your volume is very high. But generally speaking, you would take it up from the left and put it to the right. The third is a very interesting flow where you're actually doing an omni-channel business. So omni-channel essentially means you might have a wholesale, you might have a retail, and you might have an e-com all running in the same distribution center. Generally, in today's world, e-com is probably around 10 to 20% of the flow or of the throughput. A large part would be still continue to be retail, assuming you are a retailer who ventured into e-commerce, and then you would still continue to hold a lot of wholesale stock. So all the wholesale stock may be pre-packed and you would just cross-dock it. So that means as soon as it comes, you already sorted by truck plans, and then you push it out. Some of the retail inventory would come into the racks on the right. You would then do a pick and pack and push it to your stores. And then you have a small zone for e-commerce, right? Because if you're starting up in e-commerce, you may not want to expose all of your SKUs, because you know that if you have to expose all of your SKUs, you might end up sort of blowing up the entire area for e-com. So generally speaking, people like to start with something small, but and then sort of pick and pack out of that zone. So you have got 3 types of inventory that you need to deal with, and that's how you would go about actually designing the flow for these 3 operations. The third is, and this is really a very important piece when it comes to automation, right? And I told you about whether you need automation, what is the type of automation, and what is the right amount of automation. So this is one matrix that I created. This is one of many matrices that one can look at, but this is probably the basic and the most informative one, according to me. So we look at 2 axes in any warehouse. We look at the throughput on the y-axis, or the volume amount, or the number of parcels, the number of pallets, the number of cartons that you might be sending out. And on the other hand, the number of variety, SKU that you're handling. So the total types of SKUs that you handle is represented on the x-axis. Generally, when you start up, when you're in a small business, you're well off actually doing a manual operation. So I'm talking about 5,000 to 7,000 square feet space. You're probably doing a couple of 100 orders a day or even less. You're pretty much okay to have a few staff running your operations and do everything manually. Now, as you grow, right, organically, what I would suggest is look at a good warehouse management system, right? And this is where, again, we can sort of assist and help you in developing that middle or the base piece of software in order for you to slowly digitize your operations and grow both on the volume and the SKUs handled, right? Now, after that, you can go 2 ways, right? If you're an e-com business, generally the path that you would go down is your throughput may not increase so well or so high, but your number of SKUs may increase. So the variety of items that you may handle would continue to increase, but the throughput may not increase. So in that case, you're better off investing in these first level of mechanization, like I call it, which is, pick to lights, pick to voice, mobile robots. And we've given you some hints of what these things look like in the last few weeks. Those are the kind of solutions that you can start to look at, because these are semi-automated solutions. So you still need some amount of labor to enable this, but the upside in terms of the savings that you get is predominant for the variety of SKUs that you handle. So as a company, we can figure out, work with you, and understand in which matrix that your operations would lie. And if you're in this right side matrix, you would definitely be well off looking at a first level of mechanization automation. The second level of mechanization is when you grow vertically, right? And this is, again, very relevant to the e-commerce business, because you may, if you're in the vertical e-commerce space, that means you're just doing one type of products and your business, there's a lot of demand for your business. You want to keep growing, scaling, then you can look at high-speed automation solutions, right? This could be conveyors, these could be storage and retrieval systems, these could be sortation systems, all of which we can help you with, essentially driving the throughput. So you can increase the capacity that you can actually get out of the same warehouse by employing these kind of technology. So this I would probably bracket as the second level of mechanization that you can look at. The third is sort of the nirvana, right? That's where world wants to move towards, which is a fully automated warehouse. There are certain products that are picked in here, but there are several other options that one can look at. So high-speed carton shuttles, mini-load cranes, and again, looking at different pieces of technology put together, along with what's called a warehouse execution system, which orchestrates all these operations. And I'm going to break it down further as we go. But essentially, when you have a very sophisticated set of hardware, without a sophisticated sort of software, it doesn't mean anything. So when both of them combine, that's when you can actually have high volume as well as high variety out of your operations, right? Now, to summarize, right, essentially there are 5 key attributes that I would encourage you to do when you're looking at a smart warehouse. So I would like to say these are 5 must-have attributes for a smart warehouse. The first thing is automate the lowest hanging fruit. That means please identify what are the repetitive tasks that you do, right, which really is a non-value added activity for an operator. I think those are the lowest hanging fruits one can look at to directly automate, because these are repetitive tasks that just keep happening day in and day out, that they can be very easily automated using the set of technology stack that are available. So I would encourage you to look at what are the repetitive tasks you're doing, and look at putting a conveyor, putting a robot to do those repetitive activities. The second key thing is to stay nimble, right? So what that really means is you've got to have a design, a flow, a process, and the right automation, which allows you to change things as your business change. I know it's a hard thing to do, especially if you've got repetitive tasks. You might want to put a fixed set of automation to do it. But in any warehouse, there are a lot of variable activities that happen, right? So it's really important for you to work with the right set of people to understand what kind of nimbleness you need to scale up, to scale down, to scale up manpower, to scale up space, or to scale down, certain aspects of your business, so that the overall cost of your operations remains as low as possible. So nimble and being flexible in your design is another key aspect of having a smart warehouse. The third is being scale ready, right? If you talk to us, generally when we look at a solution, we look at, okay, this is what you're going to do today. This is what we're going to design. This is what you're doing today. This is what we're going to design for you 5 years from now. And this is the vision 10 years from now, right? So you've got to design the warehouse, especially when it comes to automation, having that scalability in mind, because essentially you want to get the maximum out of automation in a given space. So looking at the amount of labor, the amount of equipment, amount of software that you need to put determines how scale ready you are, and the ease of scaling is also another aspect. So, and we covered this again in the last few weeks, where we spoke about fixed automation solutions, we spoke about flexible automation solutions or modular automation solutions. If you are looking at more flexibility in your design because your business is of that nature, then you need to have that mindset to look at solving your problem. If you're running a business that has been running for last 30 years and you're probably just dispatching pallets and pallets, especially as a manufacturer for very well proven goods, you might want to look at a fixed or a rigid automation, because again, coming back to the repetitive tasks and the opportunity to automate that. So that's another aspect that you can look at from a scalability point of view. The fourth and very important aspect is real-time adaptability. So we spoke about adaptability as a whole, but real-time adaptability is having to make decisions on the floor depending on the business changes. And I'll give you an example, right? Assume you're picking an order and the operator goes and picks it manually, and then you realize that the customer has actually canceled the order in an e-commerce scenario. What would happen in a typical warehouse is you would end up picking, packing, and sending it all the way to the customer sometimes. Instead, what if you have an intelligent system that cuts the order in the real time and tells the operator to spend his time for the next order, right? So that's the amount of real time that we are talking about in terms of having that adaptability to react to business changes quickly, right? It's a roadmap. I'm not saying, that's a very simple example I gave you. Sometimes you cannot achieve that amount of real-time adaptability, but with automation you can, because with automation, everything is talking to each other regularly, periodically, and it's all inbuilt on configuration logics. So it's very easy to sort of implement. The fifth important aspect is being web centric, right? And I would like to believe that if you're web centric, you're customer centric today. What that really means is, imagine you have a distribution center which is connected to the cloud, and once the pick and pack has happened, you send a message to your customer to say, hey, your order is packed and ready to dispatch. And that's something that's happening today as well across a lot of e-commerce setups. But taking that to next level for retail, for wholesale, that's where the visibility aspect of smartness would come into picture. And that gives a lot of experience, the good customer experience as well. And therefore, it builds a lot of trust for the customer with you, right? To know where their items of inventory lies is a very, 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 very important aspect that one can look at. So again, if you've got a good set of software, a good set of hardware inside your smart warehouse, you would be able to do that. Now, what are the building blocks, right? And I said that I will cover this. In my opinion, for a smart warehouse, there are three key pillars, right? The number one is data, right? And I think I've stressed this enough already, but data has two broad aspects to it, right? The variables inside the warehouse are generally the labor as well as the inventory, right? So if you have a very good set of data to keep mapping the information you're getting from both of these resources, you will be in a much better position to take decisions, right? So to invest in the right amount of base software, process software, in order for you to fetch this information about process, about equipment, about labor, as well as about business in a single sort of dashboard, will really help you in building the first layer of a smart warehouse. Once you do that, you can look at process efficiency, right? And the process efficiency can be again looked at from three lenses. One is inbound, the other is inventory, and the third is outbound. Often we spend a lot of time in outbound process efficiency, which is picking and packing, because it is considered to be around 60% of your effort inside the warehouse. But inbound is also equally important, right? And I'll give you an example for that. So assuming you don't put away the inventory that you received yesterday, and it is lying in your warehouse docks in the staging area, and because of not having the right storage media or not having the right put away process, you end up flooding that staging area. When the next consignment comes the next day, you don't have enough space to actually put it away, right? And that container lies in your parking lot, which is sort of work in progress inventory, which you have actually paid for. So while outbound cost is probably the most relevant cost, but inbound cost is more of a hidden cost that one needs to start looking at. With respect to inventory, I spoke about slotting. That's really the key aspect that you need to look at. How can you ensure that you have the right SKUs at the right positions, and what kind of paths that you give your operator to do the put away, to do the picking, so that the SKU is touched as minimally as possible, as quickly as possible. The third pillar, and that's what you would always imagine smartness to be associated with, is technology, right? But even in technology, there are two aspects when it comes to warehouse automation, right? One is the picking side of things, the other is storage, and the third is moving, right? So it's very important for you to look at, and I've sort of bundled picking and moving into automation and storage separately, because depending on the warehouse that you have, or depending on the business that you run, the storage media may differ, right? And I'm working on a classic example today where we've got a customer who's given a bunch of inventory to us, and they said, please design a storage media to this, right? And we realized that, you're better off putting certain inventory in block stacks or in selective racking, and putting some inventory in the forward pick area, because that's where all the picking actually happens. So in a sense, it's again triadic, right? Storage, picking, and moving is again sort of three sides of the same, not a coin, but three sides of the same triangle, essentially, that you need to look at when it comes to technology. So in our world, when we talk to our customers, we try to understand these three key aspects. We understand what their data is, we understand what the process is, and then we arrive at the right technology. And this is how you would probably go through the circle of building a smart warehouse. So this sort of is probably the last slide, and I will sort of hand it over to a video after this and walk you through what that smart warehouse actually looks like. But essentially, this is our representation of a smart warehouse, right? You see there are different technologies which we have covered over the last 7 weeks. We have all represented into a single slide to tell you that the warehouse of the future may look like this, right? And there are certain warehouses globally already available doing things like this, so it's not the first time. But looking at every piece from a process, technology, and labor standpoint is the key thing, right? There is also a layer, and we covered this again in detail, the warehouse execution system, which brings all these technologies together. So in this warehouse, for instance, you're essentially storing pallets, you're storing cartons, you're storing pieces, and you're using various technologies to bring it to a customer order, right? So at the end of the day, the smart warehouse will give you three key things, right? First is end-to-end visibility, right? It's one thing is about automating, one thing is about saving labor, but if you know what you're doing, you will definitely improve, right? Even if you do nothing, you are always aware that there is scope of improvement, and you will always strive to work towards it. So what the smart warehouse does is it gives you a visibility of each and every process. You can go down to the level of measuring the KPI for every process, for every operator, for every equipment, and figure out where the bottleneck lies, right? So that visibility gives you a lot of opportunity to improve. The second key thing is real-time decisions. And I've touched upon this earlier, but essentially a real-time decision allows you to be nimble and to be adaptable to changing business needs, which are the attributes that I said are for a smart warehouse. The last but not the least is the synchronization, right? And we're having constant conversations with customers about, hey, I've got too many technologies out there. There is a shuttle system, there is a robot, there is a conveyor, there are people, there is a manual storage media. How do different systems talk to each other, and how do I make sure they're all working for a single objective or a single cause? And that's where the warehouse execution system plays a very important role, right? It's the single source of truth which talks to various subsystems in the automation setup. It understands the different nuances for every subsystem. It talks to each subsystem in its own language, but at the end of the day, brings it all to a single communication protocol, which can be pushed to a higher level warehouse management system, which then further talks to the enterprise resource planning. So the synchronization of the various process, equipment, and people is actually done by the software, and that's what essentially brings it all together to make it a smart warehouse, right? I'm going to leave you now with a quick video of what our smart warehouse looks like. This is a typical case study as well that I can walk you through. To explain you what the warehouse of the future or the smart warehouse may look like. This is a very interesting case study for an FMCG player who's essentially bringing cartons from a regional distribution center into this retail setup or the final distribution center before it goes to customers. Where again, and I want you to notice that there are hardly any touches that are happening, and that's again a very good attribute for a smart warehouse, right? So you receive cartons into various lanes of conveyors, which get sorted into a set of robots, which help you palletize into a single pallet. You then have essentially an army of robots that come hand in hand with these pick and place robots. And depending on the SKU that has been palletized, they would intelligently slot it into the right aisles and locations, right? And then you have another subsystem which takes over from that to store this pallet in the ideal position. So again, depending on how fast moving or slow moving it is, it would either place it right at the middle because it may not be so popular, or it may actually place it right at the end, so that it's very easy for it to pick it and put it into the lift which it uses to dispatch the pallet. Again, you notice that this is a typical warehouse where you actually picking entire pallets, but you will soon notice that you can also divert some of those pallets to break it into cases, right? So if you are an FMCG provider, you might have big customers who may order full pallet picks. All of those full pallet picks would go right down to the dispatch lane. And for your smaller customers, you might want to break it down to cases. And then again, you have another set of robots which can take that, receive them, and put it into a carton storage and shuttle system, right? Again, if you're a retailer who is dispatching pieces of inventory to your stores, you generally may not want to send the entire carton because it may again not be so popular in demand. You might want to pick pieces or for certain SKUs the entire case. So that robot essentially helps you to do both of those activities. So from pallets to cases, and now from cases we go into the pieces, right? This again you would associate if you're in the e-commerce world as well, because you may have 5 customers ordering the same SKU, and therefore you have what we call a goods to person station, which allows you to sort the inventory into different orders, put it into a tote, and the tote would go for the next line of packaging and palletizing. Right? At the end, you'll have another robot essentially picking it up and putting it into a trolley automatically, and again another set of robots which basically pick it up and load it onto the trucks automatically. So again, I would encourage you to notice the fact that there are less touches, we have a single flow, we essentially had very minimal labor and a completely orchestrated environment of warehouse automation. That sort of brings me to the end. Give myself 10 minutes for any questions.
Yes, Sriram, there are a few questions.
Sure.
So, what is a D2D time in courier?
Okay, so
this question has come from.
Okay, let me answer that. So D2D basically means dock to dispatch time. That means the time it takes for the time that the business has assigned for the parcel or the inventory to reach the warehouse, and how soon it needs to get out of the warehouse. So in the e-commerce or courier industry, you would probably pick up shipments at 3 p.m. from your merchant or your fulfillment center. We'll probably bring it to the warehouses at probably 9 or 10. And that parcel needs to catch a flight, the first flight at 6 in the morning, right? So it may need to leave your warehouse by 3. So it reached your warehouse by 3 p.m. It needs to leave the warehouse by 3 a.m. So that means your dock-to-dock time is essentially 12 hours. So that's the definition of dock-to-dock time, D2D, dock-to-dispatch time.
There is another question: time to acquire versus lead time. What a customer looks. So, what is the lead time to acquire?
Yeah. So, okay. Like I mentioned, if you're running a warehouse or a manufacturing setup, you always end up having a lead time for your supply, and you'll have a lead time for the customer. So today, my point of saying that was today a lot of the customers are demanding very high demanding lead time, but your suppliers are not able to match it, right, because of their own challenges and their own manufacturing and supply chain. So as a warehouse manager who's handling both raw materials and finished goods, you have to serve both the factory and the end customer. So if you don't have the lead time advantage coming from your supplier, you would end up actually delaying to your manufacturing and therefore delaying to your customer. So that's what I meant when I said lead time to acquire versus customer lead time.
How is the partial pallet or back boxes handled?
Yeah, so in any distribution center environment, especially if you're in the FMCG, FNB space, there are two types of things that would happen if you're running a regional distribution center. One, you would have heavy demand customers who would buy entire pallets, and then you have smaller customers who may not need the entire pallet. They probably need 2 layers of that pallet. So a layer is defined as 4 cartons, 6 cartons on a pallet, or they may just require one piece, right? So what we would do is there are multiple approaches to solve that problem, right? You would either pick the entire pallet, bring to a goods to person station where you can have a set of operators picking the cases and putting it away into an order pallet, or you can actually replenish that entire pallet into a carton shuttle system and then pick the cartons out of the shuttle system itself. And then there's another technology that we can look at if your height of the warehouse is low. We call it Veloce, which essentially helps you to, again, store cartons and pick cartons as and when you want. So there are multiple ways to do it. We look at layout, we look at the throughput, we look at your SLA to figure out the right solution.
Vegetables warehouse max 50 different vegetables. So minimum requirements of system and handling almost 500 tons of vegetables. Jyoti Kumar, could you please complete your question? I think it must be something on how do you manage the the same question, I guess, partial cartons. Right. Jyoti Kumar, please complete your question. We're not able to get out of anything on that. The second question is, any efficient way to handle piece or part-based call from storage?
Yeah. So yes. So we call it each picking or piece picking. Depending on your business, again, multiple technologies can do that. If you are in a very high volume, high throughput, high SKU setup, we would encourage you to look at the carton shuttle system, because essentially it can be integrated with a goods to person station, where once the carton is reaching the station, there is a screen which will tell them how many pieces of inventory they need to pick. There will be another order tote right in front of them where they can put it into that order tote, and that order tote would then go back to the dispatch area, or it may actually go back to the shuttle system. So that's one way to do it. Second is we can also look at a medium automation, which is using a put to lights as well as conveyors. So again, depending on, there are a bunch of analysis that we do, but that's the other technology one can look at in terms of picking items of inventory, depending on what the light tells you, how much quantity you need to pick, and putting it away. And the third is probably using a mobile robot. So you might have a static shelf. You would pick inventory from the shelf, put it to a robot, and the robot would then ship that item to your dispatch dock. So yes, there are multiple ways, and to be honest, that's one of the most expensive activities today inside the warehouse. Piece picking is something that everyone wants to automate as you grow.
So the question is system and hardware requirements for vegetables storage warehouse, where maximum 50 50 SKUs are there. So what are the system and hardware requirements?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things, right? It depends on how you receive these vegetables, whether you receive them in bins or plastic totes, and whether it is palletized, or do you need to do the palletization manually once it reaches. Depending on what you do, there are multiple approaches you can take. Generally, when it comes to fresh food, or I would like to categorize this fresh into fresh, you might have some temperature requirements as well. So you might want to look at a chilled warehouse where you maintain the temperature. You can go taller and start storing those pallets. Or in many cases, from my experience in the retail space, if you're a retailer, you might actually have a flow-through warehouse that I showed you before. So suppliers bring in the vegetables in the morning. It comes to your distribution center. It actually gets picked into pallets. And then by the end of the day, the warehouse is empty. So yes, there are ways to do it, and we can talk to you in detail to understand what actually fits your bill.
Up to what weight can the robots move per pallet? We can also combine another question. Does Adverb has any offer for mixed case palletizer and depalletizer?
Yeah, so I think it's a good way to combine both questions. So firstly, as far as the mobile robot or the AGV or the AMR, as we like to call it, we can go up to 1.5 tons of pallet weight. Today, we have already done a 1-ton robot. we can have a roadmap for 1.5 as well. So there is no limitation of that. If you see in any F&B, FMCG, fashion space, you would not exceed that 1 ton. So as long as you are in that range, the robot will have the capability to do it. Answering the question on the mixed case palletizer, yes, it is possible. We need to look at the range of cases that you need to palletize. Depending on that, we design the gripper of the robot so that we ensure that all the different cases can actually be put inside a pallet. Our warehouse execution system also plays a very important role in identifying the right position of the carton on the pallet so that the stability of the pallet gets maintained. So yes, we have the ability to do both mixed case palletizing as well as standard depalletizing. So again, a set of robots which can take cartons from a fixed pallet and decant it into a conveyor, and you might want to, sort of put it into a storage media that you already have. Many cases, once the palletizing or depalletizing happens, and let's assume a palletizing case. Once you palletize the cartons, an AMR, 1 ton AMR could actually come and pick it up and put it away into your pallet shelf or rack, right? So yes, both of them is possible.